6 hours ago, the first indicators appeared on the screens I used to spend my life watching. Dispersed launch signatures, heat blooms where there should have been none, movement patterns that did not fit routine exercises. I have seen those patterns before. I have briefed those patterns before. And I have spent years warning what they would look like if they were ever executed at scale. Tonight, those warnings became reality. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent over 3 decades inside the U.S. military and intelligence system. I have sat in rooms where satellite feeds were treated as primary evidence. I have participated in assessments that never reached public briefings. I have helped shape the very frameworks that were supposed to prevent a night like this. And I am telling you now, what happened over Israel in the last several hours is not just a military operation. This is a structural rupture. This is the kind of event that forces a complete reassessment of assumptions that have governed strategic planning for decades. Let me walk you through what actually happened. The timeline matters. The first launches were detected shortly after midnight local time, not from a single location, but from a dispersed network across western Iran. Mobile transporter erector launchers, hardened silo sites, mountain-based platforms embedded in terrain that has been studied for years. This was not a spontaneous strike. This was a coordinated, pre-planned, multi-phase operation. Approximately 900 Emad-class ballistic missiles were launched over a window just exceeding 4 hours. That number alone should give you pause. Not because of the raw count, but because of what it implies in terms of logistics, coordination, and operational discipline. The strike was not delivered as a single overwhelming wave. It was sequenced. That distinction matters. The first wave, estimated at around 200 to 250 missiles, was designed to trigger engagement, not saturation. The trajectories were calculated to force defensive systems to respond, but not at maximum capacity. This is what we call shaping the battlefield. Israeli air defense systems engaged. Interceptors were launched. Batteries revealed their operational tempo. That was the point. Roughly 10 to 15 minutes later, the second wave followed. Smaller in number, more precise in targeting. Northern radar installations, early warning systems, key nodes that feed targeting data into the broader defensive network. This is where the system began to degrade. Not collapse, degrade. There is a difference. Radar disruption does not destroy a defense system immediately. It blinds it incrementally. It introduces uncertainty into calculations that depend on precision. Then came the third wave. This was the saturation phase. Hundreds of missiles launched within compressed timing intervals, targeting both infrastructure and defensive positions. Power grids, substations, urban energy nodes, simultaneous strikes within narrow time windows. Tel Aviv's electrical infrastructure was hit repeatedly within minutes. This is not incidental targeting. This is systems-level targeting. The objective was not just physical damage, it was functional paralysis. By the time the fourth wave entered terminal phases, large portions of the defensive network were operating under degraded conditions, limited radar visibility, reduced interceptor availability, compromised coordination. This is when defensive failure becomes visible. Now, let me be very clear about something. This was not a failure of technology. This was a failure of doctrine, and that difference matters. Modern missile defense systems, whether we're talking about Iron Dome, David's Sling, or higher altitude intercept platforms, are built on a set of assumptions. One of those assumptions is graduated escalation, the idea that an adversary will probe, test, escalate incrementally. That assumption allows time for adaptation, reload, reinforcement. Tonight, that assumption was discarded. There was no probing phase. There was no incremental escalation. There was immediate saturation. And systems designed to optimize resource allocation under limited threat conditions were forced into a scenario they were never doctrinally built to handle. Let me explain what that means in practical terms. Missile defense operates on prioritization algorithms. Not every incoming projectile is intercepted. Systems calculate trajectories, determine impact zones, and allocate interceptors accordingly. It is efficient, it is elegant, and it can be exploited. When large numbers of projectiles are introduced simultaneously, especially with mixed targeting priorities, the system is forced to make rapid decisions under constraint. Interceptors are finite. Reload cycles take time. Engagement windows are measured in seconds. If you design an attack that forces maximum engagement early, you create vulnerability later. That is exactly what happened. Now we need to talk about the weapon itself. The Emad is not just another ballistic missile. It represents an evolution in capability. At its core, it is a medium-range ballistic missile with sufficient reach to cover the entire Israeli territory from deep within Iranian launch zones. But range is not what makes it significant. What matters is what happens in the final phase of flight. The warhead separates from the missile body and enters what we call a maneuvering re-entry phase. It does not follow a purely predictable ballistic arc. It adjusts, slightly, precisely. Those adjustments are enough to disrupt intercept calculations. Here's what that means. Defensive systems calculate intercept points based on projected trajectories. Interceptors are launched toward those predicted points. If the target shifts, even slightly, after that calculation, the intercept fails. The system must recalculate, but time is limited. In many cases, there is no second attempt. Now, combine that with warhead mass. A 4-ton payload is not just about explosive yield, it is about penetration capability, structural defeat, the ability to overwhelm hardened infrastructure. Facilities designed for lower yield impacts are simply not built to absorb that level of force. This was known, this was documented, and yet the assumption persisted that such capabilities would not be deployed at scale within the relevant planning horizon. That horizon ended tonight. Now we shift to what I consider the most revealing part of the situation, the response, or more accurately, the lack of immediate response. On paper, the United States maintains overwhelming force projection in the region. Carrier strike groups, strategic bombers, forward deployed assets. On paper, the response options are extensive. In reality, they are constrained, and I need you to understand why. Responding to a large-scale missile strike with direct military action against Iranian territory does not end the conflict. It expands it. Iran's missile inventory is not limited to what was launched tonight. Their doctrine explicitly accounts for follow-on strikes. Secondary waves, targeting of response forces. Carrier groups are powerful. They are also vulnerable in certain environments. The Persian Gulf and surrounding regions are saturated with anti-ship capabilities, ballistic anti-ship missiles, cruise systems, drone swarms, coastal defense networks. Engaging in that environment carries risk, not theoretical risk, operational risk. This is why the silence matters. In previous crises, public statements would be issued quickly. Strong language, clear positioning. Tonight, communication has been limited, measured, minimal. That is not accidental. The silence is the signal. It indicates internal uncertainty, lack of consensus, recognition that available options all carry escalation pathways that are difficult to control. This is not about hesitation. It is about constraint. Now we need to step back. Because what happened tonight was not created in a vacuum. This outcome was not sudden. It was built over decades. Policy frameworks that prioritized short-term management over long-term resolution. Strategic assumptions that went unchallenged. Analytical models that underestimated adversary adaptation. Missile inventories were tracked. Capabilities were measured. But intent, combined with capacity, was not fully integrated into planning decisions. This is a systemic issue, not a tactical one, and it extends beyond a single region. We are witnessing the erosion of a unipolar assumption that has defined global strategy since the end of the Cold War. The idea that one power, or a group of aligned powers, can dictate security architecture without meaningful challenge. That assumption is no longer holding. What we are moving toward is a multipolar environment. Multiple centers of power, multiple independent capabilities, reduced predictability. Other global actors are watching this closely, not for the immediate outcome, but for the implications. Strategic bandwidth is finite. When it is consumed in one region, it affects posture in others. This has cascading effects across alliances, deterrence frameworks, and geopolitical alignments. This matters because it changes how future conflicts are calculated. Now, I want to address something deeper, because this is where most analysis stops and where it should begin. Military capability is measurable. Missile counts, warhead yields, range, accuracy. We are very good at measuring these things. What we are less effective at measuring is will. The willingness of a state or a system to absorb cost, sustain effort, and pursue long-term objectives despite pressure. History has shown repeatedly that capability without understanding will lead to flawed strategy. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, different contexts, same lesson. Force can degrade capability. It does not necessarily eliminate intent, and when intent persists, capability is rebuilt. That is the pattern. I learned that lesson over a long career, not in theory, in observation. And it is relevant here, because what we are seeing is not just the deployment of weapons, it is the execution of a long-developed strategic approach by an actor that believes it can sustain the consequences. Whether that belief is correct is a separate question. But the belief itself shapes behavior, and behavior shapes outcomes. So we arrive at the point where most discussions focus on the next step. What happens next? What response will be taken? What escalation might occur? Those are valid questions. But they are not the most important ones. The more important question is this: how did we arrive at a moment where a 900 missile strike could be executed against a highly defended state, and the most powerful military alliances in the world find themselves constrained in response? That is the question that requires examination. It is not comfortable. It requires revisiting assumptions, decisions, priorities. It requires acknowledging that some of the frameworks we relied on may no longer apply. I am not offering predictions. The variables at this stage are too complex.